Welcome to Radio Psychotropia, cinema for the criminal in you.
Hello and welcome to Radio Psychotropia. I'm your host, Robert Black. And with me, as always, is Conrad del Bianco.
Hey, ghouls and girls.
And welcome to our first annual Halloween show. Was that a retarded werewolf?
Hey, listen.
Yeah, okay, mentally challenged werewolf then.
Some of them don't make it into the pack.
Right.
All right.
Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have a big mother of a show for you.
The mother of all shows.
Our first film is the WNUF Halloween special. Seems horror, more than any other genre, runs in cyclical fashion, where most of the films produced during a certain period are either slashers, haunted house films, zombie films, or in the case of the recent last few years, found footage. The problem with this subgenre is that it dispenses with both technical finesse and traditional narrative filmmaking that has been the mainstay of horror for many decades. It's patently difficult to believe that the character holding the camera wouldn't just drop it at the first sign of trouble. In fact, the entire genre seems predicated on the assertion that they don't. Few of the films employ it in an organic manner that feels logical and natural to the storytelling. The WNUF Halloween special not only presents itself in a format that could only have been achieved using the found footage conceit, but does so in a manner that feels completely authentic to the viewer. In doing so, I feel they singularly elevated the subgenre while creating an entertaining, campy, pseudo-vintage, micro-budgeted romp.
Don't check your dial, folks. You didn't tune in to Transylvania's public access station. No, sir. Tonight is Halloween.
Halloween is Satan's night, the night of the devil.
Reporter Frank Stewart has a special Halloween treat in store for viewers tonight. He'll be leading a group of paranormal experts to the infamous Weber House.
Do you know what happened here in the Weber House?
Some people got killed. Their son went haywire.
Frank Stewart and his team of experts will conduct the first ever live-on-TV seance.
Evil works in mysterious ways, Frank. It's unpredictable.
Are there any spirits in the house?
It's scary.
That's far out.
That or
Something strange going on in this house. Animal mutilation, paranormal disturbances, devil worship.
Wait, whoa, hold on.
This is not staged. Hello? Is this the work of the devil? Folks, we are going where no camera crew has gone before. Father, perform the exorcism. This is not some Halloween prank. The grisly evidence of the supernatural is real. We'll be right back.
You're watching the WNUF Halloween special.
Mr. Del Bianco, can we have a synopsis for the WNUF Halloween special, please?
Certainly. The WNUF Halloween Special is a 2013 found footage comedy horror film that presents itself as a television recording that aired on October 31st, 1987. The movie's main plot centers upon Frank Stewart, a television reporter that has decided to broadcast himself live as he and 4 other people, including the cameraman, investigate the Weber house, which is the site of a brutal murder of a husband and wife. Donald Weber, the suspected murderer and the couple's son, claims that he was commanded to murder his parents by demonic entities that he accidentally summoned using a Ouija board. Since that day, the house has been reported to be haunted, and an anonymous police officer testifies that he and other fellow police officers have witnessed paranormal activity at the house. Frank initially treats the broadcast as a novelty, even going so far as to dismiss the concerns of paranormal investigators Lewis and Claire Berger. As Claire immediately states that the house contains a menacing presence and that they are in danger as long as they are in the house. He tries to dissuade fears by bringing in Father Joseph Matheson, who Frank claims is versed in Catholic exorcism rites, despite the priest's assertion that he only has a perfunctory knowledge of the rites and has never actually performed an exorcism. As the film progresses, the Bergers grow more and more tense, especially after Claire's cat, Shadow, goes missing. Frank manages to convince them to continue with the broadcast and hold a seance, even after their EVP recorder is smashed off camera by an unseen force. The couple finally leaves the house after their cat is discovered to have been brutally torn to pieces. Trying to keep the broadcast moving, Frank manages to convince a very reluctant Father Joseph to perform an exorcism, despite his protests that the church must approve all exorcisms. They move to the basement, where Father Joseph again tries to back out of the exorcism. As Frank grows more frantic, his producer Veronica, which is in the van outside, asks if the Bergers have returned to the house. The film then cuts to a commercial, after which Veronica is shown stating that she has sent an intern into the house with a camera to rescue the 2 men and to see what has happened. The intern is then attacked shortly after entering by a figure in a flannel shirt. During this time, the body of Claire Berger is shown on camera, which shows that the Bergers never made it out of the house and were both killed. Veronica frantically implores Frank to break down the door and leave the house, which prompts Frank to once again demand that Father Joseph perform an exorcism. Joseph then angrily states that he was not a priest and is only an actor. As Veronica prepares to cut to a commercial, Frank discovers that the basement door has opened and goes out the door, only to be knocked down by the unknown person. The station cuts to a technical difficulties screen followed by static, after which point the bodies of the Bergers, Joseph, cameraman, and intern are shown. Frank is shown to be alive and the assailants are proven to be human. The film ends with a brief moment of static before a clip is shown of 2 sober newscasters stating that Frank and the others are all missing. They do not mention the deaths, leaving it up to the viewer to determine if the clip shown was part of the live broadcast or if it was something added to a personal videotape, meaning that we are viewing the copy owned by the murderers. Throughout the film, several commercials and news segments are shown, ranging from advertisements for local businesses or future television broadcasts to a news story about a local dentist's Cash for Candy campaign. Some of these are shown in their entirety, while others are fast-forwarded through by an unseen viewer. Mr. Black, tell us, if you will, about the themes.
Well, Mr. Del Bianco.
Well, Mr. Portugal. Why don't you go home and fucking beat up your wife and kids, okay? They're waiting. They're fucking sitting there waiting for you. What are you doing here fucking arguing with me? Go home and beat your fucking... They're waiting. They're sitting there.
They're sitting right there. Yes.
Del Bianco is referring to a former neighbor of his, a particularly loathsome individual.
Okay, start again, you fucker. Okay, Rob, I would assume the main theme of this is a nostalgic look at Halloween via a snapshot of the late 80s. Why did you select this as our main Halloween film?
I first heard about this film through a, ironically enough, an ad on Facebook for alternative cinema, and they were advertising this unique little film. I liked the ad, I liked the synopsis, I saw the trailer, and I thought, holy shit, this may be something interesting. Juxtaposed to the majority of the found footage films out there. It was advertised as a found footage film. It's been classified as that, and I do believe it falls into that category. It does very authentically capture the spirit of the season from that era. I know that the filmmaker Chris LaMartina used several low-tech methods in order to capture the look of this film. They were essentially shooting on VHS, shooting on SVHS. He shot the main part of the film on DV cam, which is a format from the early 2000s, and he transferred it to VHS. He ran it through a whole series of times until it was degraded, and it works. It captures the feel of a bootleg tape from the 80s.
100%. Yes.
Yeah, I used to collect a lot of bootleg films that have been duped like 30 times.
Yeah.
In my teenage years.
With every pass, it just degrades.
Yeah, very much so. It does definitely qualify as the quality of a bootleg tape that a collector would come across, either in a catalog in the back pages of a horror magazine, or just find somewhere in some collector's basement. A lot of people complain about the commercials in the film, that it takes them out of the narrative. You have to understand that LaMartina obviously tried to create a snapshot of an actual broadcast from Halloween Eve from a VHS or UHF station, obviously in some small city in the eastern U.S. or
Buffalo.
someplace like that. Yeah, Buffalo or Baltimore.
This looks exactly
LaMartina's from Baltimore, so it would probably be closer to Baltimore than Buffalo.
But
it looks like Buffalo. Stuff that they aired in the 80s on the Buffalo
100%.
station. Right?
That was authentic in that way, and yes, you're right. WNUF, if you really wanted to make a joke about it, could stand for Weekly News Underfunded.
Right. In fact, that's probably what that exactly it means. Yeah.
And those stations probably in an hour had about 20 minutes of content, and the rest of it was all filler. It was all commercials.
Well, yeah, they had to pay for their personnel, and those little stations. I mean, they relied so much more on ad revenue from their commercials than any other station. If they had original programming, one original program, they would exploit the living hell out of it. So the fact that LaMartina put all these commercials in there, and that they constantly interrupt the narrative, fits in perfectly with what a station of that era would do during one of its original.
It's very realistic.
One of its original broadcasts. Yeah.
It's very realistic. I do agree, though, that it does take the viewer away from the narrative.
Yeah, in fact, that's your main complaint.
That is the main
fact
complaint.
That there was too many commercials. They weren't funny enough.
Also, yes, they weren't funny enough. There were no hair club commercials.
That's right. And if you watched local TV in the 1980s, there were hair club for men commercials, so all over the damn place. So yeah, he should have put a couple of those in there.
I was thinking that perhaps the fast forwarding could have been more frantic, getting closer
to the end. That would have made sense. Because the viewer that's supposedly watching this tape fast forwards through the weather and yet stops at the commercials. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, because the same viewer would obviously be fast forwarding through the commercials.
Yes. Well, he starts fast forwarding in the beginning of the film too, which is, they didn't have to do that. You could have let a couple of commercials play in the beginning, let the thing like play naturally, and then as patience was wearing thin, the fast forward button would come more and more into play as you want to get to the answers that the film was trying to
and this would also have saved Lamartina the effort in hiring other filmmakers to create these commercials.
Yeah, he hired like a handful of other directors, about 6 of them.
Or they just basically collaborated. Collaborated, and they produced these commercials for Lamartina's film. What's unique about this is thematically where it starts and where it ends. A lot of people have been comparing this film unfavorably, and I have to be blunt here. I find the comparison a little bit absurd to a British film from the early 90s, which used a similar format where a reporter would go into a haunted house and investigate the haunted house. Thematically, it's other than the bare bones premise, it's really a completely different film than the British film. I believe it's called Death Watch. I hope I'm correct on that.
I think you are correct on that.
Yeah, I believe so. But it's not anywhere near similar to that film. In this film, we start off kind of as a jokey, haunted house visit by a jaded, cynical reporter, Frank the reporter. He starts off with his expose of this supposed haunted house. From there on, things get kind of strange as he begins interviewing the locals, and the locals tell us about the house and about what they're doing, and he asks stupid questions. What are you doing for Halloween? And that part is actually pretty comedic. From there on, his assistant plays tricks on him with a chainsaw, and we meet the 2 psychics. We go into the house, and then of course we have a billion commercials between all the shenanigans. And once we're inside the house, things get kind of serious right after the equipment gets destroyed.
First the cat goes missing. The cat takes off upstairs, and they never find it.
Right.
And then as they start their show, you hear this loud bang, this smash from the other room. And then they go into the other room to investigate, and what do they find? They find the EVP equipment completely shattered and strewn across the whole floor. I didn't buy that.
Yeah, I can understand why you didn't buy stairs.
It was the noise that wasn't substantial enough for that type of destruction to have taken place. That's why I thought it was supernatural. It had me there. It had me thinking, okay, so a ghost could have just, spontaneously destroyed this thing.
But we do find out later on in the film that there's more than one vandal, right? So it could have been 2 people smashing at the same time.
And running away in a creaky old house without anyone hearing the steps.
Well, here's the problem. They never go into the attic of this house. They just sort of meander around doing their EVP tests, which I don't even believe are real. The 2 psychics obviously are fake. In fact, what's very interesting is we find out very gradually throughout the film that all pretenses are taken away one by one. And that's what's very unique. It's almost like a Jerry Springer episode where we start off believe one thing, and then as things progress, one layer after another is removed, and we find out, holy shit, everything here is fake. And yet, there's a lot of sinister goings-on here that are unaccounted for. And it comes to the point where we have to figure out exactly what is going on. You do reach a certain point where you can anticipate the ending. And because there's no other option for the film to go other than the direction that it does. That's a problem with skipping away. Yeah. Well, yes.
So tell us about the themes, Mr. Black.
Well, the themes in this film are viewer perception versus participants' perception, how the film deconstructs its conceit using the found footage format as it progresses. It seems that as the story progresses, the supernatural is gradually stripped away. The priest is an actor. The psychics are more concerned with the cost of their equipment than the actual phenomenon that's going on. And the real horror in the film are the Christian fundamentalists who badmouth Halloween as being the holiday of the devil, but who managed to stage a massacre in order to discredit the celebration of Halloween itself. So we have quite a few that are at play during the course of the film. What's unique about this is not only does it capture the flavor of the period in the late 1980s, but it does so on pennies. So what we have with the aesthetic, the concept, and the format here is an extension of the perception that is created for the viewer to interpret the story that's presented to us. It's not really a story because we start off with a bunch of commercials, but we have a feeling that we know what we're watching. And once we get into it, you're either engaged because you have a feeling that you are seeing something very familiar, or that's been either experienced by yourself earlier in life, or you've heard about through friends who've watched a lot of horror hosts on television and who've watched a lot of horror specials throughout the years. So it's interesting how that perception is used, and it's used in a malleable manner by Lamartina later on in the film, because it throws you a couple of curves. I already mentioned the layers being taken away of what we expect would happen. At the end, it turns out the horror is realistic. The idea that horror is in your backyard is nothing new, but no one expects it to be in your attic. We've had many horror films explore this theme. When a Stranger Calls is one of the most famous. We do have a horror that's right near Frank and the psychics, and it's a lot closer to home than they ever anticipated.
I wanted to say something about the authenticity of the look of this film. The first couple times it fast forwarded, I actually checked to see if I had leaned on the remote.
Right.
Because I thought, hey, what the?
Yeah.
It reminded me of when I had a VHS player.
The actual concept, the look, the aesthetic is so convincing on this film. I have to give Lamartina a credit for that alone. Whatever flaws people complain about with the film, whether you give credence to them or not, you have to say that the look of the film is brilliant. It perfectly captures.
Technically the film encapsulates all the gritty realities of VHS early cable quality.
Right.
Okay. So really, the director didn't really have to worry about lighting or image quality at all, in terms of trying to make something that looked polished and new. In fact, that was the opposite is what he was trying to achieve.
I think this is a brilliant Halloween film. It's very modest in its scope, but it hits the ground running. And I, for one, think it merits repeat viewings on Halloween. It's up to you. I've heard some pretty scathing critique, and a lot of it revolves around the amount of commercials in the film. I would suggest that Chris LaMartina release a version sans the commercials and see how that goes down.
This film was definitely enjoyable. It kept my interest. The realism of it grabbed me, and even though I didn't buy certain aspects of it later on in the film, in terms of how the supernatural had switched to the actual realistic, it still worked, and for the budget that they put this film together with, it's quite an achievement.
Yeah,
I think it's only $2,000 they spent on this, or something like that. Like it
might even be less than
even be less. They probably paid a couple of people with a case of beer or something.
Yeah, most likely, yes. So do you think it warrants repeat viewings on Halloween?
Definitely, definitely. It's a good Halloween film. It's light. It's not that. It might not have what some people are looking for in terms of a good fright or gore or whatever. It's light on those levels, but it's also supposed to be a live broadcast, so it's not going to have a lot of that. The commercials are a little bit hard to get through, but if you understand
they become
the film,
very monotonous.
If you understand the film, then you understand why they're there. Right. And if you don't understand it, then that's a whole other issue. So,
WNUF Halloween special. Seek it out.
You don't really know much about Halloween.
There's one magical, haunted evening each year.
Halloween, the barriers will be done between the real and the unreal.
When all the scary creatures come out to prowl through every neighborhood.
The last great war took place 3,000 years ago when the hills ran red.
And here's the scariest monster of all.
Hey, it is Halloween night then. You know, with Halloween, we got a little bit of the devil in us.
And I like to see all the children out in their costumes.
Just slip a little verse listen after the chorus. Watch your back and get attacked by a monster. The wolves in my back will have a snack on your roster. Dracula swag, all black cape on. Notice all the great songs with my tapes on. Shame on you if you out trick-or-treating. No games, just horrible things this evening. In the graveyard, stirring up mischief. You feeling brave, dog? Stay away from this shit. Ghouls and ghosts, gremlins and goblins. This autumn will never be forgotten. Rotten pumpkins on your porch, put the pot in the Dutchess. Now I need a torch. You don't wanna see me knocking at your door this October. Not sober, I'm the rawest, you ever saw.
Hello and welcome to Radio Psychotropia. I'm your host, Conrad Del Bianco, and with me is Robert Black.
Hello.
Hello. And today we review Frankenstein Meets The Wolfman. The vintage horror classic Frankenstein Meets The Wolfman, released in 1943, is an American horror film produced by Universal Studios starring Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman and Bela Lugosi as Frankenstein's monster. This was the first of the studio's series of ensemble monster films, combining characters from several of Universal's monster film series. This film, therefore, is both the fifth in the series based upon Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and a direct sequel to both The Ghost of Frankenstein and 1941's The Wolfman. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman was unique in the Universal monster canon as it follows its odd arcing narrative in two intersecting episodic segments. The first detailing Wolfman Larry Talbot's resurrection and plight to find a release from his curse and his reunion with the old gypsy fortune teller Maliva. The second details Talbot's discovery of the monster in the castle ruins, his encounters with the Baroness Frankenstein, and the inhabitants of the village of Assyria. Mr. Black, can we have a synopsis, please?
Yes, Mr. Del Bianco. Okay. After the events of The Wolfman and Ghost of Frankenstein, a duo of grave robbers break into the Talbot family crypt to rob the grave of Larry Talbot, the Wolfman, of valuables buried with him on the night of the full moon. During the grave robbery, the grave robbers remove the wolf's bane buried with him, and he is awakened from death by the full moon shining down on his uncovered body, and kills one of them brutally. Seeking a cure for the curse that causes him to transform into a werewolf, with each full moon, Talbot leaves Britain and goes to the remains of Frankenstein's castle as he hopes to find the notes of Dr. Ludwig Frankenstein, so he might learn how to permanently end his own life through scientific means. By chance, during his transformations into a werewolf, he falls into the castle's frozen catacombs. After wandering around, he discovers Frankenstein's monster, played by Bela Lugosi, who had been frozen in ice. Finding that the monster is unable to locate the notes of the long-dead doctor, Talbot seeks out Baroness Elsa Frankenstein, hoping that she knows their hiding place. A performance of the life-affirming folk song Faro La Faro Lay enrages Talbot into a fit before the Frankenstein monster crashes the village party. With the monster revealed, Elsa gives the notes to Talbot and Dr. Mannering, played by Patrick Knowles, who has tracked Talbot from Great Britain to across Europe so that they may be used in an effort to drain all life from both Talbot and the monster. Ultimately, however, Dr. Mannering's desire to see the monster at full strength overwhelms his logic, and to Elsa's horror, he decides to fully revive it. As an unfortunate coincidence, the experiment takes place on the night of a full moon, and Talbot is transformed just as the monster regains its full strength. After the monster lustfully carries off Elsa, the Wolfman attacks him. She runs out of the castle with Mannerine. The Wolfman and the monster then engage in a fight until they both get swept away in a flood that results after the local tavern owner blows up the town dam to drown the castle's inhabitants.
He's a lycanthrope.
What's that?
A man who imagines himself to be a wolf.
This is no imaginary Wolfman. It's Lon Chaney Jr. as the real thing.
There's a curse upon me. I change into a wolf.
I know a man who has the power to help you.
Frankenstein? Don't mention that name around this town.
Dr. Frankenstein left a diary. In it are his records of the secrets of life and death.
My father was a great scientist. But all he created brought unhappiness.
Unhappiness and a legendary monster. Lon Chaney Jr. and Bela Lugosi battle for the heavyweight championship of horror when Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
So what do you think about this film, Mr. Black?
It's an uproariously entertaining film.
But ultimately?
But ultimately, it's actually quite forgettable. When it was released in 1943, it was pretty much savaged through the reviews.
Oh, really?
Yeah. A lot of them thought it was a mixed bag. And really, the film was tampered with. Lugosi's Frankenstein monster actually spoke. However, test audiences didn't like a speaking Frankenstein with a Hungarian accent, so all the dialogue was excised. Unfortunately, some exposition was also excised because of that. So certain things don't flow smoothly during the course of the film. I still really love the film. It's the first time, as far as I can recall, that two monsters from the Universal Studios backlot were pitted against each other. So that alone is pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
What you think of the fight at the end? Well,
That's
it was
the
the
worst
first
part of the
well,
whole
it was
film.
the first fight of two monsters going at it on screen.
And how would the werewolf fight Frankenstein? You know,
Well, he just basically jumped him when he picked up the girl and
which knocked the girl right on the ground.
Right.
She just went flying. So
right. Yeah.
I guess was
Well,
he trying
she
to
was
protect
safe.
the girl?
She
Or was he just trying to attack Frankenstein?
Because you would think that he just saw another monster and he went after the other monster immediately. Or another threat to his dominance. So he'll go after that threat. And you would like to think that he was protecting the girl. But since Talbot is subsumed by the wolf when he transforms, possibly not.
Films of that era, were they well staged in terms of fight choreography?
I don't think so.
I don't think so
A
either.
lot of that stuff is sort of an afterthought. The entire film, Frankenstein Meets The Wolfman, was conceived through a conversation in the studio commissary between screenwriter Carl Siodmak and producer George Wagner. And Siodmak came up with a concept for a Frankenstein film. And Wagner said, well, just change the title to Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman and go and write it, and we'll see what we can do with it. And that's how this film was conceived. So it was pretty much as a joke.
As an afterthought here.
Well,
Yeah,
it was a joke, essentially. And yeah, we'll come up with something. So I'm not sure how serious the people involved were in the actual project. I think they tried to do something different. They found that audiences didn't accept what they were trying to achieve, and they sort of changed the film. I think Lon Chaney Jr. in the film elicits some sympathy as the tortured Larry Talbot, during the festival party when he's with the Baroness Frankenstein, who just sits around smiling all the time.
Yeah, she's not even affected by his rage, his outburst.
Not at all.
Which is really weird, because they were sort of on what could be perceived as a date.
Yeah, you would think that would be a date.
Kind of romantic thing going on there. And then when he had that outburst, she just seemed to have his back, no problem.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah.
Everything's fine. I don't know what just happened, but I'm not going to comment on it.
Right. She just sort of way into the background.
Yeah.
It was kind of strange, but it seems to me that the Baroness Frankenstein, which even in the 1940s, I'm sorry, the Baroness Frankenstein would be considered a main character since the actual Victor Frankenstein is supposedly dead. She would be an important character in this film. Instead, Mannering gets more screen time than the Baroness Frankenstein. Gets more character development. Who the hell gives a shit about Dr. Mannering anyways? Number one, he tried to help Larry Talbot.
By putting him in a mental
Exactly. So who gives a fuck?
That was.
Yeah. Luckily, Talbot escaped quite quickly.
Yeah.
But Mannering, at least he tried to figure out exactly where Talbot came from to actually make some sort of overture to maybe some other professional in some other area in order to help Talbot.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I can't see Mannering being a very interesting character. He's actually a fucking stiff throughout the entire film. I don't even understand why the Baroness Frankenstein is interested in this guy rather than Larry Talbot. Larry Talbot may be a weirdo, but at least, he stands up for his lady.
Yeah, definitely.
Whether in human or wolf form.
I'm surprised that the doctor still didn't believe his story after the fact that he ripped apart his straitjacket and escaped a mental institute. I mean,
right.
What human can do that?
Yeah, especially
has ever done that.
Exactly.
Right?
And take a flying leap out the window.
Exactly. And it wasn't full moon, which there seemed to be an abundance of those.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's one full moon after another.
Yeah. It's now established from this film on, really, that once you get the werewolf curse, you cannot die. That even if you're killed, like he was killed at the end of The Wolfman, he was beaten to death by a silver cane by his father. And because the wolfsbane was removed from his coffin, and because he was exposed to sunlight, or moonlight, I should say, he transforms back into the Wolfman, and life is given back to a corpse that's been dead about 2 years. Also, the corpse itself was preserved. It's an interesting concept, and it was reused many times after this film. So this film actually did pioneer certain concepts in monster mythology, at least in movie monster mythology.
Yeah, I mean, and even though it wasn't praised by critics, they still went on to make many monster versus monster movies after this.
Yes,
so it did champion that whole movement.
Right.
At this point, though, in time, did they realize that a silver bullet could kill a...
Yes, they actually talked about that in the first Wolfman, that only silver can kill a werewolf.
So how come they didn't bring that up in the second film?
I guess he probably figured that silver killed him, but because the wolfsbane was removed, it brought him back to life. He figured out, well, he can't die. He's got to figure out a way to die. The silver did not kill him.
It just subdued him.
Exactly. At the end of The Ghost of Frankenstein, Frankenstein receives the brain of Igor. Frankenstein's Igor is what they call him in the film.
Igor.
Yeah, Igor. Yeah.
Igor.
Yeah, exactly.
We all gore
so
for
he
Igor.
speaks. So he actually speaks in Bela Lugosi's voice, and of course they carried that on in the Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman film. But For some reason, the audience didn't care for a Frankenstein that was intelligent. So they cut out all the dialogue, and they kept Frankenstein as a sort of deaf mute. You'll even recognize throughout the film that he sort of keeps his eyes closed. That's because he was blinded in Ghost of Frankenstein.
Oh.
So
is that why he reaches out with his hands?
Yeah.
Wherever he's going?
Yeah.
Which is such a ridiculous pose. The problem is that they didn't make his jacket long enough. If you notice, if you're a good tailor, you put your arms out like when you're steering,
when you're clothed,
your jacket long
but when you're tailoring a suit to a monster, you really don't care that much, right?
I know, but this made his hands look ridiculously long.
Well, I guess that was supposed to be the point, because these long, grasping hands are a threat if they look like they can.
But they were still pretty big anyway. Like I find Frankenstein to be just silly.
Well, Bela Lugosi just felt short. I mean, you have to admit, Lon Chaney Jr. was a very tall man, and they had to position Bela Lugosi's Frankenstein so that he was so much larger.
Yes.
Right?
Lon Chaney might have been tall, but he was stocky as well.
Right.
So he actually didn't look that tall when he was in wolf transformation.
That's right. I think he used
look.
Yeah, I think he also during the fight they used a smaller actor, a double. To go. Or actually, Frankenstein throughout much of the film, because Bela Lugosi at this point was 60 years old. He was ill all the time. A lot of segments in the film are essentially Lugosi's double that they brought in, and they shot in either long shot or medium shot. They didn't concentrate on his expressions or anything. So, sure, it's starring Bela Lugosi as Frankenstein, but he's probably not even in half the bloody film.
Ill? Like you mean, I'm making a gesture of someone putting a needle in his arm right now.
Well, we know that much later on, Conrad, but at the time it was...
he was actually sick.
Yeah. Even when we first see the monster in the ice, it's actually Lugosi's double, it's not him.
That scene was a little bit weird. The ice cavern.
Right.
I didn't understand how they ended up in an ice cavern.
Well, what happened is the Wolfman broke through some of the ruins, right?
Yeah, he went into a well or something and ended up in underneath the ruins of
the castle ruins, right?
Castle.
Yeah, exactly.
How is it that they would have ice under there?
Well, it's on top of a mountain. Obviously, when the castle exploded, some of the ice on the mountain went down there and preserved the Frankenstein monster. It froze.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, it's straining credibility, what the fuck?
It is. They just had to have him frozen somehow.
Right.
So that's how they did it. They didn't have the budget to make the whole castle frozen on the top.
Right.
And they're on a mountain in that castle? Isn't that the castle that they fight in at the end?
Yes.
But it's not on a mountain, it's on a river. There's
a river running below it, right. But Castle Frankenstein, I mean, you see it off when he arrives with the gypsy woman. When Talbot arrives, you see the castle.
Yes,
and it's all a bloody mountain, remember?
I remember that shot. But then, so that doesn't make sense then. Then at the end, they have the river going through it.
But it was below the mountain, Conrad.
And the dam.
Well, actually, you're correct. It doesn't really make sense. Well, hold on a second. We don't know how far the catacombs went, right? Mm-hmm. So it could have been like right there, right near the river, and all the
which wasn't frozen.
Yeah, very interesting, eh? Well, they used dynamite to dynamite the side of the bloody mountain. Remember?
The dam, you mean?
Right.
Yes, but that's further up. But it
they also took away part of the mountain, but whatever.
Yeah, from the perspective of where the castle was to where the dam was, it rose. Okay, so the dam was higher than the actual castle. They changed the geography when they got to that part.
Yeah.
They basically, we just figured that out now.
Okay, we're looking into logic for a 1940s monster film. The point is, okay, we have to accept that, yeah, they were bloody taken away the river after it was blown up. Okay? We might as well accept it.
Fine.
It's still a great fucking movie. Very, very appropriate to the Halloween season. Very entertaining. I can understand why it received mixed reviews. I would have liked to have seen the version that they showed test audiences. That would have been quite interesting to sort of match that up with this one. Maybe it was just a payday to Kurt Siodmak and Wagner, and maybe even to Lugosi and Lon Chaney Jr. Chaney Jr. was very good in this. The gypsy woman, Malova, I believe, well, I'm not even going to pronounce, it's a Russian actress. I'm not even too sure if I could pronounce her name, but she was actually very good. She doesn't have much dialogue, but her expression when she sees Talbot for the first time since The Wolfman, I believed it. I believe that she had some genuine affection for this man who had this curse with him. Mm-hmm. And I thought that carried the film. I actually wanted to see a road movie with the old gypsy woman and Talbot. I didn't want him to go. Yeah, on the lam, trying to escape everything and trying to find some salvation. They would have probably been both doomed at some point. Unfortunately, the actress died in 1949, so any hope of maybe resurrecting the Wolfman for another film, I know he was seen in a couple more films after this.
Talbot's.
Yeah, Talbot, yeah. Yes. Plus he was in a couple of long... Well, yeah. He was also a couple of Lou Costello...
oh, was he?
Yeah.
Did he play the Wolfman in that one?
Yeah, he did.
Because they had Abbott and Costello.
Abbott and Costello, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Bud Abbott and Lou Costello.
That's right.
What did you think, I was going to ask you, sorry to interrupt, of the production value of this film?
Oh, exceptional for the period.
Yeah. I thought the shots were very well orchestrated.
Yes.
The depth of field, if you notice in every shot, there were nice wide camera shots.
Yeah.
With lots of depth of field. Mm-hmm. Lots of things packed into the shot, and they really thought out their camera angles because they didn't really move the camera that much.
They filled the entire angle
exactly
perfectly.
Yeah, I thought
also the miniatures were great. Frankenstein Castle,
not bad. Yeah,
the village, even the village itself, the party, it felt authentic, like an authentic German village.
Even the yeah, it did look like a German. That musical number was actually quite funny.
Yeah. What you liked were the Lederhosen. That's what you fucking liked.
Yeah. I love the little hats. It reminds me of Oktoberfest. Don't make fun of it. That stuff is... listen, when you're drunk at Oktoberfest, it all makes sense.
It does.
For some fucking reason, it all comes together. The mystery is solved. Yeah. When you're there...
Yes.
Okay.
Everything makes sense.
It all makes sense.
The Lederhosen, the Fräuleins, the nonsensical songs.
Yeah.
It all comes into perspective.
The accordions, the sausage, everything. Yeah. Here.
Unfortunately, Mr. Talbot didn't get into the spirit when he was there.
No, he was.
If he would have gotten into the spirit, maybe he would have gotten some help from those locals.
He needed to get his beer goggles on.
That's right.
That's what.
And you know, once you got your beer goggles, hey, werewolf curse, who gives a shit? I'll fucking release him when I'm good and ready.
Keeping on the production value theme, what did you think of the werewolf transformations? I didn't think they were that bad.
They were actually quite good. Again, you have to take in consideration the effects in the period. I believe it was Jack Pierce that did the makeup. Well, I know he did the makeup for the original. That he did it for this as well. And it's exceptional. I thought it was great. I find it very strange that the Wolfman would be smaller after he transforms instead of larger. again, the problem here
it's not so much that
is
he's smaller. It's just that
well,
he's
I think
stockier
it's
with all that hair.
I think it's a problem. The problem here is that Lon Chaney Jr. was a really big man, and so to find a double in werewolf makeup larger than him would be very difficult. But the point is, I don't even think his double in this film is nowhere near the size of the actor. So therefore, it feels weird when he transforms. Okay, I think we should wrap it up here.
Okay.
Anything else you want to add about Frankenstein Meets The Wolfman?
Shit, no.
Shit, no.
No, I'm done. We're done. We're good.
What did you think of Ilona Staller as Baroness Frankenstein?
She was great. I mean, she didn't have very much to do.
Right, she just comes in, sits down,
She was
smiles, says a few words.
I liked her at first, and then later on I was just like, okay, she's just not really... She's just there to be a blonde in this film. To be the palest person on the screen. That's all she's there for.
Oh, Jesus.
The palest person.
Oh, man.
In black and white, it's very dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she has one expression throughout most of the film.
Yes.
And that's just a smile.
Yes. She just smiles at everything.
That's right. Even when there are fights breaking out around her, she just sits there and smiles.
Kind of like Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
That's sort of like that.
So she's like the female Forrest Gump. Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we put this horse to bed.
Beat it.
Maybe a little bit.
To submission.
Well, we beat it with a, let's see here, a few cans of beer, at least.
Yeah. One or a few beers.
Welcome to my home. I've been expecting you. You may wonder how I knew you were coming, but see, sooner or later everyone passes through here. Before we start our show in your theater, the producers and distributors wish to take this opportunity to warn you, the theater audience. In the event all the lights should go out, you see a shadow moving past your seat. Under no circumstances attempt to drive it away. It may be the person beside you. You may think my warning unnecessary, but in a few moments, I will be a lot safer in here than you will be out there. Sometimes after seeing a show of this type, you find yourself walking home alone in the dark, and you hear strange footsteps behind you. And when you turn around to look, if you dare look, you will see nothing. For behind every locked door, strange things await you. Creatures from the bowels of the earth. Beings too horrible to describe. But most of all, you will feel that cold, wet, clammy hand.
welcome back from our musical interlude. Here is Robert Black.
Hello and welcome back to our Halloween episode. And that was our retarded werewolf in the background. I Am a Ghost is a 2012 experimental horror film directed by San Francisco-based filmmaker H.B. Mendoza. After a successful initial screening at the San Francisco International Asian American Film Festival, it took the Genre Film Festival circuit by storm, winning a multitude of awards and impressing even jaded genre cinema pundits with its cleverly conceived, unsettling, disorienting narrative and artfully crafted eerie set pieces. Produced with a paltry budget, raised from a crowdfunding site, I Am a Ghost at first glance may seem like a no-budget version of Alejandro Amenabar's The Others, but that comparison quickly is buried once the viewer becomes fully immersed in the protagonist Emily's bleak world of endless routine, loneliness, and mystery. We are forced to wonder if Emily may be a symbol for what humanity may need the most.
Emily.
Who's there?
We know each other, Emily. My name is Sylvia. We do this every time. Can you repeat to me what we are doing?
I'm dead. I was murdered in this room.
That's usually where the story ends.
Apparently not. Look at me.
I can't see you, Emily. I can only hear you.
I can't see you either. It's like you're a ghost.
Likewise.
Are you sure I can't just leave this house? I just went grocery shopping.
You didn't go grocery shopping. You're just passing through a memory.
But I came back with eggs and cheese and flowers.
That grocery store probably doesn't even exist anymore, Emily.
I was killed by a man in this room. I know what I saw and I know what I felt.
Emily, my aim is not to insult you.
You're calling me crazy!
Emily, you're talking to a disembodied voice, and I converse with dead people. I think we've both transcended the boundaries of sanity. God.
You haven't found me. I've come to you.
Now, Emily, repeat after me. I am a ghost. I am a ghost. I am a ghost.
I am a ghost. I am a ghost. I am a ghost.
Mr. Del Bianco, can you give us a synopsis of I Am a Ghost, please?
Certainly. During an indeterminable time period, Emily, a troubled spirit, haunts her own Victorian house every day, wondering why she can't leave. With the help of Sylvia, a clairvoyant hired to rid the house of spirits, Emily is forced into a patient-therapist relationship, uncovering disturbing mysteries about her past that may help her move on to the next place.
So, Mr. Del Bianco, this is an interesting little no-budget feature. It was financed through a crowd-funding site, which shall remain nameless on the show unless they pay us some sort of a stipend. H.B. Mendoza is primarily known for a couple of very small films, regional San Francisco-based films. At least one is a musical. What inspired him to
actually produce and direct a horror film is something I would actually like to ask him. But it's interesting, and I'm very glad that he made that transition. I think he has a hell of a lot to contribute, and if this is any indication, he should continue his exploration of the horror genre on a regular basis and not branch out
back into musicals?
Either back into musicals or to other genres. I think he should stick to horror. He has a real talent for it. And HB, if you're listening, yeah, I'd really like to see another horror film from you. And I know you're in my feed, so you know that we're reviewing your film. And
haven't you reached out to him?
Well, I have talked to him on at least a couple of occasions. Obviously, he wants to leave a lot of the mystery in the film up to interpretation. So I don't think he's willing to answer direct questions about certain themes in the film. Mm-hmm. That I can accept. But I'd really like to know exactly what inspired this film, to take it from an idea to a point in time where you would like to raise a budget for it. Usually there's some sort of inspiration for all that in between. Some sort of momentum where there's something about the themes in the film, something about the subject matter, which you yourself consider personal, perhaps, and that you would like to put on screen.
Do you feel that maybe he was trying to branch out?
Well,
in terms of not getting stifled
possibly
by just doing musicals. Some filmmakers are like that. They want to do a comedy, they want to do an action film, they want to do a drama. Actors are like that. I mean,
it's quite possible, but for example, a director like Sam Raimi, who did the Evil Dead series, right? His first love is not horror, it's comedy. He started doing horror films, and the truth is, Sam Raimi has a really accomplished talent for horror. I would say H.B. Mendoza falls exactly into that category. I think he has a real knack for horror. I haven't seen his musical. It's called Fruit Fly, or something like that. I believe so. Fruit Fly. I don't know his previous film, or perhaps his first film was a musical. I know he's producing a film now that is not a horror film. I really do wonder what sort of reception it'll receive, because a lot of the people that has seen I Am a Ghost would like to see a follow-up horror film from him.
He's producing, not directing this next
no, he
project?
He is directing, as far as I know, yes.
But he does everything anyway. He was the writer on this.
Right.
And producer, I believe.
Correct. You really like this film.
I love it.
You think it's the best film we've ever come across on the show?
Yes, I do. Shot for shot, this film is pure gold. I thought it's teeming with subtlety. It would seem that every shot, every move of the camera was painstakingly mulled over.
Yeah.
Like the layers of an onion, we are presented with a story which, at first seems repetitious and mundane. Then almost magically, every time we think we understand something, it mutates and broadens our overall perception of what is really going on.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
It's perfectly paced and edited. Okay, it's shot very well. The lighting is all natural for the lion's share of the film. And the film keeps the viewer wondering. Our attention is heightened with every pass of the main character's seemingly, repetitious existence. And that's what I think really intrigued me. I was drawn right in, right away. The opening shot of the house, the close-ups, and then the fact that the story was told purely visually for the first half of the film, or at least the first third of the film, always intrigues me. I love film that does that doesn't give a lot of exposition, that doesn't have to explain every action.
Right. It leaves it up to the interpretation.
It just sucks you right in because you're trying to figure it out.
It's so kinetic.
Exactly.
That it grabs you initially and it pulls you right into the story itself.
Like I was saying, the camera movements are so well engineered so as to give you, the viewer, only as much information as the scene will allow. To me, this is really a thinking man's horror story.
Absolutely.
The dialogue is intelligent and fairly believable. The voice acting on the part of the clairvoyant is excellent. Well timed and with just the right amount of subtlety and emotion that you really you latch on to it. It's not overplayed.
The film could have very easily evolved to hokiness.
It could have,
at
yes.
every fucking point.
Yeah, we were
It
discussing
never
this.
does.
Yeah.
It never does. It always keeps your attention. It always presents another angle, another layer to the proceedings. The talks with Sylvia, the clairvoyant, could have very well have been tiresome, repetitive, and could have very easily been boring. However, everyone seems to reveal a new aspect of Emily's situation.
Well, this is just, a credit to the director. He obviously understands pacing, and he has the patience not to give too much away at once. Which is a trait that's sort of missing in Hollywood these days.
Yeah,
or
definitely.
in filmmaking in general. The editing is just perfect. They seem to cut those scenes right where they need to be cut. We were discussing the use of the sound from upstairs. Like there was a constant knocking sound. What was the term that you used for that? I can't remember right now. But it's sort of a common thing in horror films.
Oh, a trope, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's essentially he takes horror tropes, which could have been very cliche, and are very cliche in many horror films still, but he uses them very selectively, and they take on an entirely different dimension than they would in a mainstream horror film. They become ominous, they become believable. When you hear the creaking and the groan upstairs, what may be meaningless in a mainstream horror film, where you would have such a scene at the beginning of a film, even in the middle of a film, or would seem kind of laughable, because of what went on with Emily and the session with the clairvoyant previously, it takes on a new feeling of dread. And from that dread, we explore a different aspect of the character. It segues into another scene where we do.
Pure visual style. I just absolutely loved. No dialogue or backstory to spoon feed the viewer. Other films like Rear Window by Hitchcock employ this technique, which I find to be totally captivating.
Right.
It keeps one's interest cemented firmly and provokes curiosity to solve or disseminate what is being presented to them. And even when we finally get some dialogue and answers, it seems that our attention is heightened even more so to figure out the missing pieces between the visual story and the facts we know.
At that point, we're struggling, like Emily, to find out exactly where everything fits. What the hell is happening here? Why is this happening?
Exactly.
And why has this put into motion an event that I have not foreseen before in this house? Like, for example, at one point in the film, she sees herself duplicating. Every room has an action. She sees herself in the hallway, in the bathroom, in the kitchen, going through certain actions. These are impressions, according to the clairvoyant, these are impressions that have occurred in her life that she's constantly reliving. She has to find out from there how she can integrate all these experiences back into herself, so she can find out exactly where the experience that occurred in her mother's bedroom fits into the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. Another trope was the scene where she goes past the room where she finally does have a discussion with a clairvoyant.
Right.
Every time she would go past it, she would hear her name. She would hear Emily.
Mm-hmm.
And which was hard to catch the first time. I wasn't quite sure what that was because I
Right.
don't even know the character's name. It didn't. To me, it just sounded like some noise or whatever. But she would stop, look left, look right, drop her bucket, and run off. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next time she came back, the camera was placed slightly different. There's even a scene where we actually get to see from her perspective what she's looking at.
Right.
Looking left, looking
yeah.
right. I found that totally fascinating.
Yeah.
There was slight use of split screen in this
The
film.
irony behind that, Conrad, is that Sam Raimi used that technique in The Evil Dead.
Yeah,
where
the
over and
original.
over and over again. This is why earlier on I brought up Sam Raimi in comparison to H.B. Mendoza. I think there's a few similarities there.
I don't think he used it as strongly as Mendoza did in this film. I'm just
Used it
back
pretty.
to the
Used it
Evil
pretty.
Dead.
Well, let me put it this way: it does have a feeling of foreboding.
Yes. Okay.
When both filmmakers did it, so I think he established exactly what he wanted to do.
Right.
Yeah.
The use of very subtle soundtrack was very good in this film. There was sort of almost like a rumble going on. The first shot where they show the house, it comes into focus, and the light comes in, and there's that push of sound. Just gave a very strong sense of foreboding and doom that carried on into the rest of the film. The only times where soundtrack is when she's making her eggs or whatever, and she's listening to the radio. And if you notice, there's a few times where she's in front of the radio eating her breakfast, where the scene darkens.
Yeah.
You notice that?
Mm-hmm.
It would just darken ever so slightly, just as she was raising her knife.
Mm-hmm.
And then we don't get to see what happens until much later on. You do see a scene after that where her hand is all bandaged up, and she's in the bathroom, going.
So slowly, as the film progresses, little clues are revealed
Yeah.
as she's going through her routine.
It's like one of those Chinese puzzles, those ones that you have to sort of put together. It's a 3D puzzle. It's very intricate.
What makes this film is that it's a perfect representation of the cerebral and the visceral, because he puts in equal measure the plight that Emily finds herself in is handled with equal veracity, as well as the fear, the dread, the hopelessness of where she is and how she finds herself in these circumstances are dealt with visually. Granted, viscerally, I don't mean blood and guts. There's actually very little blood and guts in this film, although what there is used very effectively. You do feel when that knife goes in, definitely.
Yes, even though it's a butter knife.
Yeah. Well, because it's a butter knife,
Maybe
you feel
because
it
it's
more.
a butter.
Yeah, exactly. That takes a lot of pressure to put that in.
The first cut is the deepest. So, can you go on a little bit about what you found out about the clairvoyant?
Well, you have to question why the clairvoyant is there in the house and why she's talking to Emily, right? We do know this. She represents a family that have been obviously disturbed by the haunting by Emily in the house, so they called in this clairvoyant, Sylvia, to cleanse the house of the spirit, or to convince the spirit to move on to the next plane of existence.
Because obviously it's stuck in some kind of...
But really, Sylvia is there at the behest of this family to get the spirit out of there.
Right.
So she's really there not as much for Emily as she is for the family.
Her interest is to please the family.
Exactly.
They're a client.
Yeah, essentially. So yeah, she has this pretense with Emily that she's there to help her move on to the next life. really, she's there to kick the goddamn spirit out of
Yeah.
there, so the family can have
peace,
more or less live in peace and have their parties. So really, you really have to question Sylvia's motives in this matter. Now, she assures Emily later on in the film that, oh, she's there for her. She's helping her to move to the light. Well, unfortunately, and yes, there is spoilers in this show, so be aware of this. We find out at the end there may not be a light for Emily. And Sylvia knew this all along, but she just wanted to get rid of Emily.
Well, it's not so much that she knew that, it's something they discovered as they went on, right?
I don't think so, dude.
Really?
Sylvia knew that Emily committed suicide, okay? That she was a mentally deranged individual, or an individual that was suffering from multiple personality
she
disorder.
does reveal that she did some extra research.
Correct.
After their first conversation.
Right.
To find out exactly
details,
what was
right.
going on, because they were having problems finding Emily's light, wherever it is that Emily's supposed to move on to. Now, Emily is also playing hardball with her, because she's not cooperating 100%.
Well, you know what? She's suspicious, and rightly so.
Yeah.
Honestly, I do think in the film, and this is interpretive, so the viewer may, in fact, some of you out there that may view this film, will come up with a different interpretation. But I do believe that Sylvia is intentionally being deceitful. She knows that Emily committed suicide. She has to determine exactly why Emily can't leave the house. Really, she's essentially a businesswoman. Emily is just a means to an end. She wants to get Emily out of there, and she's being purposely deceitful. I do not believe that she thinks that Emily will go on to the light.
I think that spawned out of the fact that she's having so much trouble with Emily to get her to close their sessions.
Right.
There's a part in this, and again, there are spoilers in this, but basically when they first have their first talk, they have the talk, she explains to Emily who she is. Emily thinks Sylvia is a ghost at first, spirit.
Yes.
She thinks she's hiding in the wardrobe, and then Sylvia explains that she's standing in front of it. So when Emily can't see her, she's suspicious. Now they have their conversation, and then Sylvia reveals something that, which I found very interesting, is the fact that they've had this conversation a few times, and because they've never closed off properly during those sessions, Emily, once she flees the room, will forget that
right,
any of
because
this
she goes
happened.
into a sort of temporal loop,
Right.
where she then goes back to her regular routine.
Exactly, until her curiosity gets her back in that room,
right,
responding to Sylvia.
Right.
Now, the way they close off is Sylvia asks Emily to walk through her, which Emily says sounds like a piece of cake. And this is where it gets funny.
Yeah.
Sylvia says, "Well, you said that the last time."
Yeah.
And then Emily goes on and says, "Well, I promise this time." And Sylvia reveals, "Yeah, well, you said that the last time as well."
Yeah.
So we're not getting anywhere. And if you don't close off with me, it'll just be more of the same. You know, repeat.
So she does cross over into her.
Not the first time. She runs out of the room. She does run out.
Right, the first time,
And
yes.
they have to go through the whole thing again, the whole introduction again. This time, I think she finally does close off with her.
Right.
Okay?
Yes. When she does, she has a flood of memories hit her like a brick, where she sees all these aspects of her in the other rooms.
We get to see her witnessing her own repetition.
Yes, and she's shocked. What's interesting about this is, at one point, she looks at her double in the hallway, and the double in the hallway notices her. And when she mentions this to Sylvia, that this double this memory, this imprint in the hallway just looked at me and noticed me. And Sylvia says, no, that's impossible. It's an imprint. What else is it? But an imprint can't notice you because it's a phantom. Obviously, the imprint is something more because it's connected to something else.
Yeah. At this point, Emily still thinks she can leave the house. She's still convinced that she can just leave the house, that might be her way of escape. And Sylvia tells her that she can't. And Emily says, well, you know, I leave the house every day
to get
eggs,
buy
groceries
and
and flowers and whatever.
Yeah.
In fact, that's not true, because we are offered a camera angle from outside the house, which shows the door opening for Emily to leave, but then closing again.
Right.
And then they showed the shot from inside with her already with the groceries.
Right.
So obviously she cannot leave this house. Still convinced of this, though, she does attempt to. And this is an interesting scene.
This is a great scene. Very well directed. Once she approaches the door, she opens the door slowly, and she steps forward.
Into complete
emptiness.
Black. It's a chasm of blackness. It's just
and the way this is shot is masterful. It pans back, and we see just the doorway with Emily in it, and surrounded by an empty void that keeps growing larger and larger. So the camera pans back, and then it pans slowly forward
again,
toward Emily, with an increasing look of horror on her face. And I would put up this scene with any recent horror film of the last few years. It is absolutely masterful, and you really fear for Emily at this point.
Exactly.
And this is all direction, Conrad. This is just
definitely
incredible.
Yeah, staged, very well choreographed and engineered.
And she just ends the scene screaming and closing the door.
Closing the door. She realizes at this point that, she can't leave.
Yeah.
That she has never left this place.
Yes.
And that's
and
a
she's
horrifying
surrounded
moment.
by some sort of void. What is this void?
Yeah. Then it gets back to the question of the trope, the noises from that staircase, that circular staircase that leads up to the attic, which she has never
More
gone
so
to.
at this point, the noises increase in frequency.
Yeah.
And they all come from the staircase upstairs. And Emily brings this up with Sylvia. And Sylvia says, well, what's up there? Well, it's an attic. Have you ever been there?
No.
No, there's really no reason to go up to the attic. Well,
there might be.
This is yeah, very much
there
so.
Very well might be.
Very much so. So as it's determined, Emily's mother would lock her when she would exhibit this second personality, would lock her up in the attic when she was alive. So now, as Sylvia and Emily are discussing the attic, I don't know who it was. I think it was Emily that was reticent about going up to the attic, but Sylvia said, well, you know, maybe you have to go up to the attic.
Well, Sylvia had done some research,
right,
and talking about, was telling Emily that she actually was not murdered. Okay, because that's what Emily.
But she did not say what happened.
No, she didn't. But Emily was convinced that she had been murdered in the room where.
By a man, yes.
By a man. She fell back onto this carpet and was stabbed repeatedly and died in a pool of her own blood. Okay.
Right.
That's what she remembers. That's what she believes. But with further research, Sylvia reveals that because of her multiple personality disorder, that when she died, this other part of her is still up in the attic.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yeah. When it split off from her after death, it sought refuge in where it was usually entombed by the mother, which is the attic.
Which we should explain something here. It's revealed in the film that when Emily is younger, she would go into these fits where she would basically black out, and when she came to, she would either be holding a knife, she'd be strangling her sister, or she would be engaged in some kind of violent act. Okay?
And it's always a violent act, right?
Yeah, it's always violent, yeah. She has no recollection, and which lends credence to this whole, demon possession thing or multiple personality disorder. It sort of walks a fine line on that. It's hard to.
Well, yeah, it's suggested. Back then, it would be interpreted as a demon possession. It's obviously mental illness, but at the point of death, the second personality we find out was essentially a different entity was created, other than Emily, which unless you die, you really don't know if other personalities, if you happen to have other personalities, if they actually split off from you.
Right.
But that's what happened with Emily. The second personality split off and sought refuge in the only area of the house that it felt safe.
But it seems to be trapped there. It cannot leave the attic.
Well, Emily has to go up there and release it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Emily eventually goes up there and opens the door, finds nothing there.
That's another great scene, actually.
Yeah, a very well directed scene. And we do see the interior of the attic, and it's empty. But she is filled with fear and dread, and she immediately closes the door and goes down. Unfortunately for her, it's too late.
The entity has
The
escaped.
the entity or the personality has escaped and is now seeking to eliminate Emily.
Yeah, the next scene is when this other side of Emily is revealed.
Yeah.
Which fantastic makeup. It's basically a male figure, naked, done in gray makeup, with its screaming bloody murder. Okay,
right.
With its eyes, not just its eyes, but all around the eye as well, all done in black makeup. So there's nothing there, which is exactly what she described when she was talking to Sylvia about the man that had attacked her. Was this black-eyed, empty-eyed man, and emptiness, almost like like when she tries to escape the house, that empty black void, that chasm, right?
That keeps her there. Yes.
Was basically personified into this entity's face.
Yes.
And that's an effective scene when it starts chasing her.
Yes, into the bathroom, and it keeps advancing. You would think that would stop it. Once Emily sought refuge into the bathroom,
she does manage to close the door,
and it taunts her through the door.
It taunts her and talks to her in a demonic voice, which was very well done. And the demon offers its take on on how it's been trapped in her. And how it hated the fact that it had to answer whenever her name was called. Right. I thought that was really interesting. What did you think?
Or it claimed to be the victim, at least, and that how Emily had trapped it.
Exactly. I believe she decides to confront it or to let it in.
Yeah, that really went over well.
Yeah, that didn't. Because it immediately gets on top of her and goes to
strangles her.
And
her eyes go up into her head. Yeah, that was awesome. Now, at this point, where the entity, which is actually Emily's other personality, is strangling her, we see split screens of the impressions that we saw Emily experience beforehand.
Right, all her
disappearing.
Memories. Right.
All her memories, all her experiences are all being integrated into Emily. They are disappearing from the house, and Emily's becoming more whole at this point.
Right, at this point.
That's the interpretation that I got out of that whole scene.
Exactly.
I think it's pretty self-explanatory, actually. There's no ambiguity about that sequence.
No.
As far as I'm concerned. So at this point, obviously feeling stronger and more confident,
she fights back. Yeah.
Emily can fight back against this other personality.
And what's interesting is she ends up fighting it off and running towards that room.
Right.
Okay, she gets downstairs, goes to the room, and falls backwards, and is attacked by the entity. All the while, she's calling out to Sylvia to help her.
Right.
And
to gain a sort of tether to reality, because that's what saved her the first time. She's seeking out another tether.
Right.
Now Sylvia's voice at this point is off into the distance, because Emily's reality is shifting and changing.
Right.
The ties to Sylvia are obviously on very shaky ground, and this is why we can't hear Sylvia in this scene very well.
Right.
At this point, because Emily is more open to the fact of experiencing the imprint that's in that room, she sees that she in fact was experiencing the man, the entity, stabbing her, which in reality was actually her stabbing herself.
That's right. She was doing it to herself.
But because Emily now accepts that fact, that reality, the entity, we see it losing its power over Emily.
Well,
she
is able to stand up and observe the entity attacking her on the rug.
Right.
She's able to step away from it. The entity is attacking, and then its eyes start to lessen. The blackness starts to recede.
Yeah.
And I found this part interesting because it looked like it was in horror at that point.
Yes. What was going on, because Emily's personality essentially was overcoming its personality.
Exactly.
It's becoming the dominant personality. Therefore, the power, because they were split off, her power is becoming dominant over the entity. It's losing its power
balance,
over Emily. Therefore, it's being reduced, and it becomes from this horrific demon character to a really pathetic male figure cowering in the corner.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and this is where the limitations come into effect. Sylvia keeps telling Emily, go into the light, go into the light. There is no light. According to religion, if you commit suicide, the last thing you do is go to heaven. There is no light. There is only darkness, and what is coming to get Emily, now that she's whole and has salvaged herself and saved herself from this demonic other personality, is the void of hell. Hell and darkness is beginning to form around Emily, and her last words are, I'll be all right.
She accepts it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's a very downbeat ending, and it explains the darkness, because she does accept that she committed suicide finally, and she's able to move on. Unfortunately, the place that she moves on to is not a place that anyone would want to be.
It's not necessarily a good place. It's almost another prison.
Right. It's essentially another prison.
It is.
So it's actually a very downbeat ending. Yeah. But hey, at least she was rid of the other personality.
And at least Sylvia gets her paycheck.
Yeah, that's really what matters to Sylvia. Exactly. This is why I didn't particularly care for that character. Obviously, that was the only benefit that Sylvia was looking for.
Who's buying tonight? Yeah. Sylvia.
Exactly. I would say that perhaps Sylvia is based on the charlatan psychic Sylvia Brown, where it's been suggested more than once that perhaps that was a character that H.P. Mendoza based this particular clairvoyant on. Mr. Del Bianco, what do you think about I Am a Ghost's prospects
for finding a audience in its future.
No problem.
Really?
I think this film lends itself to a great wide audience. Anyone that's intelligent enough to understand it will
well
enjoy
that's the problem, isn't it?
Okay. So
this is actually an experimental feature. Its narrative structure is non-linear, it's elliptical, and it's disjointed. It's basically a puzzle that the viewer puts together.
Exactly.
That takes work, dude. A lot of these fuckers don't like work.
Yeah.
For the adventurous genre film aficionado, and you can fucking laugh at me for saying these fucking 50-cent words all you'd like. They're out there and they know who they are. They will love this film. At least like it. It's possibly one of the better micro-budgeted horror films I've seen in a very long while. One of the exceptional examples of how to use your resources to its full advantage. And I hope H.P. Mendoza does more horror films. And for Halloween, I would say that it's one of my choice picks. For
it's
Halloween,
good enough
yes.
to, in my opinion, to be at TIFF or at any of these.
Yes, it's very strange considering a lot of the fucking garbage that's at Midnight Madness, especially this past year. Why
this one didn't infiltrate the ranks? Yeah.
Why this film wasn't selected for TIFF? Yeah.
It deserves it.
Yes, very much so. So I guess in conclusion, I would say for Halloween, give I Am a Ghost a try. It's not a conventional film. Like we said, it's for adventurous viewers. But once you prepare for that, I believe you'll find it's quite rewarding. Excuse me, rewarding. I'm actually into what is it? The 8th Sin Black Lager right now. And we've had Black Creek Pumpkin Ale. We expect all these labels to provide us with free samples for mentioning them. I believe we also had some Canic Pale Ale at one point, and some Lowenbrow too. So we're kind of slurring right now, badly. So bear with us, please. We still have a little bit to go. Happy Halloween, everyone.
Happy Halloween.
Yes. And stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Our thanks to Kevin MacLeod, Annie, DJ Idiot, Riz Ortolani, Alan Howarth, Planet Blue, Fulci Black remix by Robert Black, Son of Samhain remix by Robert Black.